16 years ago, a mafia boss saved a little girl nobody wanted. Tonight, that same girl walks into a courtroom holding the one piece of evidence that can save his life. But to understand how a child became his only hope, we need to go back to the night he found her in the rain. Stick with me, because what happens in the next 15 minutes will make you believe in loyalty again. Picture this. Her folder is open. Her father stands in handcuffs. And everything is about to change. Now let's rewind. It is raining hard in Seoul, 16 years ago. A black car sits outside an old broken-down building, the kind most people walk past without a second look. The door opens. Kong Do-hyun steps out. He is younger then, with harder eyes and a sharp black suit that looks completely out of place in this dark, forgotten alley. His men stand behind him, waiting. To them, this is simple. Just another debt to collect. Just another night. Then he hears something. A small sound, coming from under a broken stairwell. A child, crying. His men do not react. Why would they? Men like Do-hyun do not stop for strangers. They do not stop for weakness. They do not stop for anything that cannot pay them back. But Do-hyun stops. He turns toward the sound, slowly, like something inside him already knows this moment will cost him everything he thought he understood about himself. He walks toward the stairwell. And nothing in his life is ever the same again. Kong Do-hyun did not raise his voice. He never needed to. Across the table sat a man who owed him money, and that man's hands were shaking so badly his teacup rattled against the saucer. "You said 3 weeks," Do-hyun said quietly. "It has been 3 months. The man began to talk fast, making promises, blaming bad luck, blaming his partners, blaming anything but himself. Do-hyun listened without blinking. He did not lean forward. He did not lean back. He simply watched, the way a man watches weather that has not yet decided whether to become a storm. When the man finally stopped talking, Do-hyun set down his own cup, slow and careful, like the sound of it touching the table was the only warning anyone would get. "You have 1 week," he said. "Not because I am kind. Because I am patient. Do not confuse the two." He stood. His men stood with him, moving like shadows that belonged to his body and not their own. No one had raised a fist. No one had needed to. Everyone in that room understood exactly what would happen if the debt was not paid. And that understanding alone was enough to make grown men sweat through their shirts. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Do-hyun walked to his car without looking back, his coat moving behind him like something with its own quiet authority. His driver opened the door. He slid inside without a word, because words were rarely necessary for a man like him. This was his city. Every deal, every debt, every whisper in every backroom eventually passed through his hands. Business owners feared him. Rival bosses respected him. The careful respect men give something they know could destroy them without effort. Even the police in certain districts knew better than to ask too many questions. He had built this life brick by brick, using patience instead of noise, using calm instead of cruelty, though everyone understood the cruelty was always there if it was ever truly needed. As the car pulled away from the curb, Do-hyun looked out at the city lights sliding past the window. He had everything under control. Every piece of his world sat exactly where he had placed it, obedient and predictable, the way a chessboard looks right before someone realizes the game was never simple at all. He controlled everything in that city. He was about to discover the one thing he couldn't control was his own conscience. The sound came from under a broken stairwell, so quiet that Do-hyun almost missed it. A soft cry, more like a whimper than real crying, the kind of sound a person makes when they have already learned that crying too loud brings trouble instead of help. He stopped walking. His men noticed and stopped too, confused, glancing at each other the way people do when something does not fit the plan. This building was supposed to be empty. That was the whole point of meeting here. No witnesses, no cameras, no questions. But someone was here. Do-hyun walked toward the stairwell alone, waving off the man who moved to follow him. He crouched down slowly, the way a person crouches when they are trying not to frighten something small and afraid. There, pressed into the corner where the concrete met broken wood, was a little girl. She could not have been more than 5 years old. Her clothes were too thin for the cold, torn at the sleeves, and she held a small blanket against her chest like it was the only thing left in the world that belonged to her. Her eyes were wide and steady, watching him without blinking, the way children watch adults when they have already learned that adults cannot always be trusted. She did not run. She did not have the strength to run. "Boss," one of his men called from behind him, his voice careful but firm. "She is not our problem. Leave her. Someone will find her." Another man added quietly, "She will only slow us down. We have business to finish tonight." Do-hyun did not answer them. He kept looking at the girl, and something inside his chest shifted in a way he did not recognize and could not explain. He had seen fear before. He had caused fear before. But this was different. This was a child who had already learned to expect nothing from the world, and some old, buried part of him understood that feeling far better than he wanted to admit. "Where is your mother?" he asked her gently. The girl did not answer. She only tightened her grip on the blanket. One of his men stepped closer. "Boss, we should go. This is not what we came here for." Still, Do-hyun did not move. He reached out one hand, slow and open, the way a person reaches towards something wild and easily frightened. The girl flinched but did not pull away completely. For a long moment, nothing happened at all. Just a powerful man crouched low in the dirt, and a small child deciding whether or not to trust him. Then, quietly, she leaned forward, just slightly, just enough. Do-hyun closed his eyes for one breath, as if something inside him had already made a decision his mind had not caught up to yet. He had spent his whole life being feared. He was about to find out what it felt like to be needed. The girl did not speak for 3 days. Do-hyun brought her back to a small, quiet house on the edge of the city, a place his men barely knew existed. He did not tell them what to do with her, because he did not know himself. He was a man who gave orders about money, about deals, about fear. He had never given an order about a child. The first night, she would not eat. She sat in the corner of the room with her blanket, watching the door like she expected someone to come and take her away again. Do-hyun stood there awkwardly, holding a bowl of rice he did not know how to offer. "You have to eat something," he said, his voice softer than his men had ever heard it. She looked at him but said nothing. The next morning, he brought her small shoes, the wrong size, too big for her tiny feet. She wore them anyway, shuffling around the house like a small, careful ghost. He watched her from across the room, unsure what to say, unsure what any of this meant. When she caught a fever a few weeks later, Do-hyun sat by her bed the whole night. He did not call for his men. He did not leave for meetings. He simply sat there, watching her small chest rise and fall, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. For the first time in years, he was afraid, not of losing money, not of losing power, but of losing something he could not yet name. When her fever finally broke and her eyes opened weakly, he let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. Her voice was small and cracked. "Sheila," she whispered. "Sheila Okafor." He nodded slowly, repeating it under his breath, like the name itself was something worth protecting. That night, he brought her a small wooden bird, carved by his own hands, rough at the edges but shaped with care. He placed it gently in her palm. "So you always know which way home is," he told her. She held the bird tightly, and for the first time since he had found her, she smiled. From the doorway, a younger man named Jin-woo watched this quietly, arms crossed, his face unreadable. He had worked beside Do-hyun for years, had seen him build an empire on discipline and control. He had never once seen him look at anything the way he looked at this child. Jin-woo said nothing. He simply smiled to himself and walked away. Jin-woo smiled that night. But it wasn't for the reason anyone thought. 16 years passed like water moving over stone, slow and steady, wearing away the sharp edges of things. Sheila Okafor was 24 now, and nothing about her looked like the frightened little girl who once hid under a broken stairwell. She stood tall, sharp-eyed, and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that made people take her seriously the moment she spoke. She had graduated at the top of her law class, the kind of student professors remembered years after she left their classrooms. She had built her own life, one built on discipline and hard work, far away from the world Do-hyun had spent decades constructing. She never talked about her father's business at dinner parties. She never explained where her school fees had come from when she was younger. She simply worked, studied, and built something clean for herself, brick by brick, the same patient way she had once watched Do-hyun build his own empire. But she never fully let go of him either. Every Sunday, without fail, she called him. Sometimes the conversations were short, just a few words about her week, his health, nothing important. Other times they sat in comfortable silence on the phone, neither one needing to fill the space with noise. He was not just the man who raised her. He was the only home she had ever truly known. Still, there was a distance between them that neither one spoke about directly. She had chosen law, chosen justice, chosen a world that stood in quiet opposition to everything his business represented. He never asked her to choose differently. He simply let her go, the same way he had once let her hold that small wooden bird all those years ago, trusting she would find her own way home. Then one week, the Sunday call did not come. She noticed it immediately, the way a person notices silence in a room that is usually full of sound. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he had simply forgotten. But something in her chest refused to settle, a small, sharp worry she could not shake. She called again on Monday. No answer. Tuesday. Still nothing. By Wednesday, she sat in her small apartment, staring at her phone, her law books forgotten on the table beside her. She thought about every version of what could be wrong, and none of the answers felt safe. Finally, on Thursday morning, her phone rang. It was not her father's number. She answered slowly, her heart already sensing what her mind had not yet accepted. She thought she'd left that world behind. She was wrong, and she was about to find out how wrong. Jin-woo had waited 16 years for this moment. For over a decade, he had stood quietly beside Do-hyun, always the second name, always the steady hand in the background while Do-hyun took the credit, the respect, the loyalty of everyone in the organization. Jin-woo had built half of that empire with his own two hands, yet no one ever said his name the way they said Do-hyun's. He had told himself for years that it did not matter. Then he watched Do-hyun bring home a child who was not his blood, watched him grow soft in ways Jin-woo did not understand and quietly despised. A man like Do-hyun was supposed to be feared, not gentle. He was supposed to build power, not tuck a little girl into bed at night. Jin-woo watched all of it happen and told himself that a man distracted by love was a man who could be replaced. So he began, slowly, carefully, the way Do-hyun himself had once taught him to do everything. He kept records that were never quite accurate. He moved money through accounts that looked ordinary on the surface but told a very different story underneath. Piece by piece, year by year, he built a version of Do-hyun's empire that looked exactly like a criminal enterprise built entirely on greed, with no room left for mercy or loyalty at all. It took him years to finish it. Patience, after all, was the one lesson he had learned well. When it was finally ready, he did not go to a rival gang or a criminal court. He went somewhere far more dangerous. He went to Prosecutor Song, a sharp, determined woman known across the city for chasing cases no one else dared to touch. Everything you need is here, Jin-woo told her, sliding a thick folder across the table. Falsified accounts, laundered money, records going back years. All tied directly to Kong Do-hyun. Prosecutor Song studied the documents carefully, her expression unreadable. And you are giving me this because? Jin-woo allowed himself the smallest smile. Because some debts take 16 years to collect. Within days, the evidence moved through the proper channels, each document reviewed, each account traced, each signature verified by officials who had no reason to doubt paperwork that looked so carefully, convincingly real. The arrest happened at dawn, quiet and clinical. No shouting, no struggle. Just officers stepping into a home that had once sheltered a frightened little girl, now closing in around the man who saved her. Do-hyun did not resist. He simply looked at the handcuffs closing around his wrists and understood, in that instant, exactly whose hands had built this trap. The man who taught her never to trust blindly had just been betrayed by the one person he trusted most. The cell was small, cold, and gray. Nothing like the world Do-hyun had built for himself over 30 years. He sat on the thin metal bench, his hands folded, his face calm in the way it always was, even now, even here. His lawyers came and went, each one wearing the same tired expression. The evidence against him was thorough. Too thorough. Every account matched, every date lined up, every signature looked exactly like his own. It was the kind of case built by someone who understood him completely, someone who had studied his patterns for years. "There has to be something we can use," one lawyer said, flipping through pages for the 10th time. Some gap, some mistake. There was no mistake. Whoever built this case had learned from the very best. Word moved fast through the city, the way it always does when a powerful man falls. Rival organizations that had feared Do-hyun for decades suddenly grew bold, testing borders they never would have touched a month earlier. Businesses that once paid him respect began quietly shifting loyalty elsewhere. The empire he had built brick by brick was cracking from every direction at once, and there was nothing he could do from inside a cell to stop it. Then Sheila came. She sat across from him in the visiting room, her face pale but steady, the same steadiness he had taught her without ever meaning to. She had read the case files. She understood, better than his own lawyers, exactly how bad this looked. "I can help," she said quietly. "I know people. I know how these cases work." Do-hyun shook his head slowly. "No. Why not?" "Because you finally built something clean," he said. "A life with no shadows in it. I will not be the reason you lose that. You are not a shadow to me. I raised you to stay away from this world," he said, his voice firm despite the cracks underneath it. "Not to drown in it because of me." She wanted to argue, but something in his eyes stopped her, the same quiet certainty she remembered from her childhood, the look he wore right before making a decision no one could change. He was choosing again, to protect her the only way he knew how, even if it meant carrying everything alone. She left the visiting room that day with her jaw tight and her mind already working, though she said nothing more to him about it. He watched her walk away and allowed himself, just once, to close his eyes. He was ready to lose everything to protect her. She wasn't ready to let him. If you're feeling this story so far, hit that subscribe button now, because what Sheila does next is the reason this channel exists. Real loyalty, real redemption, stories that remind you good still wins. Let's keep going. Sheila did not go home after that visit. She went to work. For weeks, she moved quietly, telling no one what she was building. She used every skill she had learned in law school, every late night spent studying cases that seemed impossible to win. She traced the falsified accounts back through hidden paths, following small mistakes that only someone who truly understood the system would ever notice. Whoever built this case was careful, but no one is ever careful enough forever. She also found something else. A name buried deep inside old shipping records, a contact who had worked closely with Jin-woo for years and had grown afraid of him long before any of this began. It took patience and trust to convince this person to talk. It took even longer to get them to agree to speak the truth out loud, where it could actually matter. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was full. Reporters sat near the back, waiting for another quiet, predictable ending to a powerful man's story. Jin-woo sat near the front, calm and composed, dressed sharply, already imagining the empire that would soon belong to him. Then Sheila walked in. She wore no expensive jewelry, no dramatic entrance. Just a simple black suit, her back straight, her eyes steady. In her hand, she carried a plain folder, and resting on top of it, small and worn with age, sat a little wooden bird. Jin-woo's eyes moved to it immediately. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. "Your Honor," Sheila said, stepping forward. "The evidence presented against Kong Do-hyun was not built from truth. It was built from betrayal." She opened the folder and placed the documents before the court, one by one. Financial records that told the real story, dates that lined up with a different set of transactions, and finally, a recorded statement from the contact who had feared Jean Woo for so long, now finally speaking without fear at all. This case was never about justice, Sheila continued, her voice steady even as her heart pounded harder than she let show. It was about greed. A man who spent 16 years waiting to take something that was never his to take. Jean Woo shifted in his seat, his composure slipping for the first time. He opened his mouth to object, but the words did not come. The truth, laid out clearly on the table, left him nothing solid to stand on. Prosecutor Song studied the new evidence carefully, her earlier certainty now replaced with something closer to doubt. The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that comes right before everything changes. Sheila looked at Jean Woo one last time, calm and unshaken. Jean Woo thought he'd buried the truth. He forgot the girl he underestimated had been trained by the best. The judge did not need long to decide. Within the hour, the charges against Kong Do-hyun were dropped. The falsified records were traced back to their true source, and by the end of that same day, Jean Woo stood in handcuffs in the very courtroom where he had once expected to watch his rival fall. He said nothing as they led him away. There was nothing left to say. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light was soft and gold, spilling across the steps where a small crowd had gathered. Do-hyun walked out a free man, his suit wrinkled from days in a cell, his face older than it had looked 16 years ago, but his eyes were the same steady eyes that had once crouched low in a dark alley to look at a frightened child. Sheila stood waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. He walked toward her slowly, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden bird, the same one she had carried with her into the courtroom, the same one he had carved for her with his own rough hands so long ago. "You kept it," he said quietly. "I never let it go," she answered. "Not once." He turned it over gently in his fingers, studying the small, worn wings, the rough edges softened now by 16 years of careful holding. Then he pressed it back into her palm, closing her fingers around it the way he had done the very first night he gave it to her. "So you always know which way home is," he said, his voice breaking slightly on the words. She smiled, and for the first time in weeks, so did he. They stood there together on those courthouse steps, a powerful man who once decided whether people mattered at all, saved by the one person he had once decided did. He had spent his whole life building an empire out of fear and control. It was love, quiet and patient, that finally saved him when everything else had failed. Redemption, it turns out, was never about power. It was never about control, or fear, or the empires people spend their lives building. It was about who chooses to come back for you when everything falls apart. 16 years ago, he saved a girl nobody wanted. She grew up to save the only father she ever knew. And together, they proved that the family you choose can be stronger than any empire you build. If this story moved you even a little, that's exactly why I make these. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because every week I bring you another story like this one: power, betrayal, and the kind of love that saves people when nothing else can. Drop a comment and tell me which part hit you hardest. I read every single one. See you in the next story.